And
Coming up.
okay, we're streaming. Yep.
I'm streaming away. All right. Welcome everyone to another episode of AI Insights with Stephen Bowman, software guru, AI expert, and me, Mike Russell. Today, we've been talking about all kinds of agents. Not secret agents, but agentic architecture, manager agents, doer agents, gopher agents, whatever you want to call them. Today, we're talking about multi-agent architecture, and it goes by different phrases, but it's another view of how do we combine all this stuff together. So it sounds like it's complex. I'm sure you'll simplify it for us.
I hope so. Sometimes it gets complex to me. And I like to think I know what I'm talking about with this stuff. Um, Realistically, I use a bunch of phrases. I've said agentic architecture. We've talked about V versus T-shaped bots
Right?
or agents. Um, you guys know, if you've been here before, that Sam Altman comes up in our conversations quite a bit. His 5 levels to AGI, level 3, where I think we're at right now, is AI agents. And um, one of the one of the things that I want to talk about is there's now a new phrase to add to the mix, and it's actually more palatable, I think, for most people than agentic architecture or something silly like that. And they just call it multi-agent systems, MAS. Um, so what is it? Well, it's the same thing we've been talking about, just in slightly different words. So this is when we've got more than one AI agent responsible for creating whatever desired outcome or output we want. So again, I was calling this agentic architecture. That's kind of where it was. I think this is a more palatable way of using that. But some of the scenarios that I ran and some of the scenarios that we'll talk about here today, um, I think are more palatable. Again, same thing. And the reason why this is important is, and we'll talk about this as we step into the news stories, you'll see it all over the place. The guys kind of in the top tier of the AI world, whether that's Sam Altman or the CEO of Anthropic or the CEO of Salesforce, all of, excuse me, all of these guys who've been touting all of this AI capability and AI agent capability and LLMs and the guys at the top of that hype cycle. Um, what it's really boiling down to is they're coming up with new ways to drive people to an understanding of how to use their stuff. That's not very simple. That's not very elegant. Um,
Well, that was pretty straightforward. But I mean, the ways that you're describing it sometimes it isn't, right? So
yeah,
for instance, just side question, if something or does it matter? If something is called multi-agent or agent architecture, does that mean that the agents have to work together, or can they just be at different spots somewhere in the process? And I mean, is that part of the distinction of multi-agent architecture that they're actually connected to each other, or does it really matter, or is
great
not?
question. Great question. So there's really two ways to go about thinking about this. And we've tried both at my firm. And I can tell you for sure that we've had much more success in one path than we have the other. So I would love to say that, right, we talked about it before. We talked about AGI. We've talked about having a robot that does dishes in
Right?
your kitchen, right? And all of these things are possible. In fact, you might see them in the media today. See Kim Kardashian with her new Tesla robot. What is it actually doing in her life right now? I have no idea. I can tell you this. Very few systems that I've been a part of right now, today, currently, can operate completely independently on their own,
Hmm.
even if they are multi-agent systems. And the reason why is because there's there's too much leeway in the LLMs that we use right now. What I mean by leeway is there's too much gray area. Now, the way that we've solved this problem is by maintaining a sense of control
Oh, wait,
over.
so let's go back for a second. So,
Sure.
I mean, people generally probably understand what gray area means. What do you mean when you say gray area when you're talking about bots and agents?
So right now, one of the things that came out with the newest OpenAI 401 preview, aka Strawberry model, was the idea that these agents, that chatbot, was going to be a reasoner. It was going to use reason and logic and um, be able to perform or mimic human thinking and thought processes. And while that's true, when you use it in OpenAI's web-based chatbot, right? Go to chat.openai.com and interact with it there, as long as you're a paid member. I don't know if the free accounts might have access to it now. In their environment, you can see instances, I can see instances where I've got some amount of logic, reason, I can follow the chain of thought. However, that's currently not available via API, at least not to me or my firm. And because it's not available via API, we have to use the previous model, which is 401, which is great. It's better than 3.5. It's better than the previous models. It's pretty fast. It's responsive. But that reasoning, that chain of thought model is not visible to us. And because of that, because it's a different model, it just plain behaves differently. And in the tasks, this is where the rubber meets the road, to answer your question. In the tasks that we're asking AI to perform right now, there's two primary components. There's a do component. Hey, go and write this email, run.
Mhm.
And then there's an evaluation component. Hey, tell me if you think this email deserves a response or not. And that's something completely different. And that's when I say gray area, because sometimes the keywords that are used and the way that the model's being used, it will say, yes, that needs a response. And here's an explanation, or here's a candidate response, and here's my explanation on why it's a good idea. And other times it'll say, no, you're right. It doesn't need a response. And there's no, right, OpenAI right now is a black box. We have no insight into why the exact same message and the exact same request got a yes on instance one and a no on instance two.
Okay, I was thinking, sometimes when I put a prompt in, essentially what I got back was what I call the consultant answer. Well, here are the considerations. You can decide based on the considerations. I mean, it wasn't worded exactly like that, but it was kind of throwing it back at me. Well, here are some of the qualities I found, which, apply those that, for your situation. I'm like, well, gee, thanks. I could, that doesn't help. Unless I'm asking to look up stuff, right? Like, what are the considerations for something? But,
No, good, good. So what we've found that actually works better for us based on where AI is currently is we give it clues or we give it thresholds. We have I've used AI to develop a scoring system for just as an example. I ask 5 questions, and based on my criteria for how to score the answers of the 5 questions that get asked, it develops a score. So there is some evaluation there, but we then take the evaluated scores and make decisions in if then else logic and then hand that off to a different AI system. So while these are multi-agent systems, we're not requiring one agent to make a decision and then hand off to another agent every single time. Now, there are instances where that happens. The amount of logic that we expect it to process is much less when we ask it to perform a handoff to another agent. Because, for lack of a better way of putting it, the word that we use is it feels like at times the LLMs get confused. We're very specific. We have static, what we call system prompts, where we're actually telling the agent what to do over and over and over again. And 95 out of 100 times, we get the expected result. But there are those 5 times where we don't understand why it behaved a way. Why, when we ask it to make an evaluation, the same evaluation, 95 out of 100 times, it's an A. And then there's 5 times out of that 100 where that's a B, and there's no insight into why that's happening. So in order for us to have 100% confidence and gain control of that process, we use AI to help us define the criteria that we then ask software that we program to do instead of allowing AI to make those decisions.
Okay, so you and the software that you've built, or to put it in another way, are actually performing what a manager agent might do, right?
Yeah,
So we're not to the point yet where, I'll just paraphrase again, that you can have a full doing agent and manager agents all doing everything unmonitored, because we're still not to the point of 100% confidence. I'll just use that word, right? Confidence in the result, or the consistency of the result. Maybe that's a better way of putting it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the smaller the amount of data that we provided and the smaller the evaluation that we ask, the smaller the variance in response gets. So when we're asking it, as an example, I've got one agent that asks that series of questions and then scores the answer. At one point in time in that process, it asks for some data from the end user and evaluates that data to determine the validity of the data. We ask people for username or for name and email address, and we actually evaluate whether or not their name that they gave us and their email address seems valid or not. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago in checking for valid email addresses. Well, we're also doing it for first name and last name, meaning if somebody gives us the first name test and last name test, yeah, that doesn't exactly match what we're looking for. And that in that workflow, agents are handing data and results off to each other. So agent number 1 hands the information of first and last name and email address to a separate agent, who then coordinates with a third-party platform, determining whether or not the email address is valid or not, comes back with an answer, and then makes a determination on first and last name as well, and hands the results back to the primary agent, which is kind of like a manager. But again, the amount of data that we're providing it is small. The amount of evaluation that we're asking it to perform is small. And there's much less variance for risk.
Right, I was gonna say less
Or
opportunity, right, for variance or not coming back with a high confidence answer.
Yeah, yeah. So good recap on multi-agent systems, agentic architecture. Those are just some of the real world examples that I'm using. But in my conversation with AI, a couple of news articles, I took them to AI, I asked some questions, and they came up with some interesting ways to use multi-agent systems right now that I didn't think of. I wouldn't have thought of these things, and I thought that they were fun and interesting, and maybe enough, sharing them might be enough to whet somebody's appetite or to illuminate some new possibilities. So one of the things that they talk about is, we've talked about it before, automate routine tasks. Well, that's
right.
great, but
yep.
Multi-agent systems can handle scheduling meetings, assigning tasks, sending reminders, and ensuring that nothing slips through the cracks. They can share information about task management and meetings, right? They're able to distribute updates in a new and different way. They can distribute documents to the appropriate team members, not to everybody. This is not a reply all, right? With the idea of keeping everybody on the same page. So what I immediately thought of was, Steve translation, that person who sits in some of those big meetings with you and they rarely say anything, but they take good notes. And at the end of it, everybody looks to that person and says, can you help me with an agenda for can you help me with takeaways? And they say, we got you covered. that person
Or the
then,
first thing is, or please email me your notes. And then they might ask for the summary, right?
another great example, speaks very little, always seems to keep the rest of the team on track. We'll call it, I don't want to say a project manager because then we're talking about management aspects. How about a project coordinator? How about somebody who's just managing the flow of information, making sure that the people who said that they had takeaways and dates, all of that data makes it into a project management software, tickets. Yeah, all of that stuff right now is possible with a multi-agent system, a multi-agent setup. And I think 2025 is going to be the year where you see some of the big boys. You're going to see Jira, you're going to see Monday, ClickUp, Asana. Right? You're going to see some of these big companies that have some, right, either upload your transcript for your meeting or they're going to have an active agent sitting in on the meeting, listening. It's just being recorded.
Right.
Pardon me. Got sick over the holiday, just before.
Yeah, afterwards I would blame your cooking, but that's
Yeah, yeah. Hope everybody had a great Thanksgiving. Regardless of whether I was feeling well or not, I still cooked for a lot of people. Yay. It was great. I got my 3 minutes of the year where everybody's pigging out and I can just hear the silence of everybody eating. It's awesome. Okay. Similarly, unified communications platform. This is going to get interesting here in a minute when we talk about the news story, so we'll segue into that pretty quickly. But agents can integrate email, chat, project management tools, SMS tools, call center tools, task management tools. It can integrate all of that into one interface. So you guys have heard me talk about this before from a standpoint of one good example that talks about this is I've taken newsletters, emails, transcripts from meetings, all from my HOA, and dumped it into one chatbot, and then asked the chatbot, hey, when did we talk about putting the new bridge in at Steve's house? And it comes back and says, oh, we talked about that 7 times. Here's instance 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
right.
I didn't have to look through an email. I didn't have to dig through a transcript. I didn't have to do any of that. All of that data is already loaded. And one agent or multiple agents, one for email, one for text documents, et cetera, is able to find that information quickly, bring back all instances, and then I can interview it. I can just ask questions. And a big part, I use the word a lot. It's come up 10 times in the last couple of days. And the word is conversational. So AI can take data, whether it's one agent or 50 agents, can take data from multiple sources, and then you can converse with it. You can upload your P&L, your accounting P&L, and you can say to AI, hey, how can I make more money? And it's going to talk about ways and things that you can, oh, you got to trim expenses here, et cetera. You can have a conversation with your data, whether it's an email, a text, picture, spreadsheet. It can be really complicated. It can be very simple. You can interview it conversationally, and it goes and looks up the data that you gave it. A tremendous use. If you're not using AI that way right now, I highly recommend trying it. Right now, take your nastiest spreadsheet, give it to AI, and just start asking it some questions. All kinds of questions. Conversationally. You guys, I've got that, I think I showed last time, I've got a little button in my browser that I click so that I can just conversationally speak with AI. It fills out my prompt, and then it seems to work better with common language, conversational language.
Well, that was the big deal about the large language models when they came out, was the language part of it, right? Is that now I didn't have to adapt as much, although I still may need to know how to do a good prompt, but I had to do not so much adaptation as you would with a computer before, right? Adapt to its interface. Now it adapts to us. So that was the big reversal. We had always wanted it, but true conversational automation was not really there until then.
Agreed. Agreed. Right. The large language models pair words together. It's a great big algorithm. Right. It's deep math. But they pair words and they predict the future, sometimes poorly, sometimes wonderfully, just like us.
There are word frequencies, letter frequencies, all sorts of things, that we
Yep.
generally know. Now, that doesn't mean that everything is correct all the time. It just means that most of the time it can figure that out, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So what I want to do is I'm going to scooch down to an article that I found in TechCrunch a couple
Okay,
of
now you have to stop using those technical terms like scooch down. So you gotta keep this at a non-tech level.
Scooch is one of my faves. There, just to get another one, faves. Um, Anthropic Claude, the Claude chatbot that most people are familiar with, the parent company is Anthropic. Um, they just released something that Mike had an epiphany on. It's called MCP. In this instance, it's Model Context Protocol. And what MCP is exactly what I just said. And what I mean by that is MCP is an open source framework that allows your chatbots, allows your AI agents to connect to your email, your databases, your CRM, your Google Docs, chat messages, maybe SMS history. And it's not just you, it could be for your entire enterprise. And the thing that makes it so powerful is that becomes the common, that's the hub and spoke. Developers, business owners, it doesn't matter. All they have to do is connect their chatbot to that hub. And then that hub knows how to talk to your email. It knows how to talk to Google Docs. It knows how to talk to SharePoint. It knows how to talk to your custom databases. It's got all of that magic built into it. And the reason why this is so important is because right now, most of the chatbot connections that we create, the AI agent connections that we create, are done manually by somebody like me or a developer or a third party, where they say, okay, this AI agent or this chatbot needs to connect to this Google Sheet or to that database or to this CRM. And it's manual and it's specialized and it's time intensive. There's no getting around it right now.
I would say I would add another term that's fragile because
Fragile.
any one of those tools updates their interface. Now it's broken what I built to connect my stuff to it.
Absolutely. Fragile is maybe that might be the number one component of why, right? And a big part of why is because this is my big problem with a lot of the new software vendors that are putting out stuff. When something goes wrong, I want to know what went wrong.
Right.
And when I'm lucky these days, I get an error message or an email. But most of the time, I don't get anything. It just didn't work. And there's no reporting mechanism. So the fragility of a lot of these systems that are being strung together with Zapier, no offense to Zapier, or to a one-off interface over here, they don't even have error logging embedded in the platforms. Or if they do, it's on the vendor side of it. It's a black box. I don't have access to it. All I know is that it didn't work. I don't have insight into why it didn't work. So yes, fragile is another good example. We used to say one throat to choke, right? So I wanted one vendor that had, took care of these three components that all work together. That way, when there was a problem, I had one point of contact. I knew how to get a hold of them. I knew what their SLA was. That service level agreement, that means if something's broken, they'll get back to me, or I can reach them 24 hours a day, or they'll have it up and running in 24 hours no matter what. Everybody's got a different service level agreement. um, these systems are the I don't want to discount what MCP is. MCP is the first time I've heard of one of these large players offering a multi-platform connector to go get your data and to be the interface, right, the chatbot interface for you to be able to ask one question. It scans the band for an answer and then brings it back to you without having to write code, without having to do anything crazy. That's an
Yeah,
ugly
well,
thing.
that's a big deal. I mean, it doesn't sound like it on the surface, but just to emphasize what you said, the idea that now I can potentially, I haven't looked at MCP in detail, but I can potentially say, I want to connect to my email, and it says, all right, show me where the email is or where the app is right on the computer, and it figures out, okay, I know the interface for this one. What else do you want to connect to, and so on.
Right, right. How can I extend your results by connecting to a different data source? Get ready for a piece of software, right, an AI agent to ask you things like, I didn't find anything in that document. Can I scan your email for you? We're very close. And it's about time. We've got all of this data, right? We've talked about it for weeks now. We talked about how having good data, having clean data, and having access to all of that is going to be more and more and more important as we move forward. As a database administrator, right? As a career as a database administrator and a big data developer, this is nothing new for me. All of those times, for everybody who's ever known me, all of those times when I jumped up and down on the desk and said, no, we can't do it that way. We need to have referential integrity. We need to have foreign keys. We need to have clean data. We have to put rules on the front end to make sure that they don't use test@test.com for their email address. This is why. I didn't know it at the time, but I knew it was important. And this is a good example of that. Now, you can upload all of your data to AI and ask it to validate it for you, but it'll cost you time and money. And
Well, so I'm waiting for it to, implement this and wait for it to say, hey, I need to buy some more data. Link me to your bank account. In which case, I know that the scammers have somehow made it into MCP.
there's a whole, I mean, we talked about it a couple of weeks ago, or a couple of months ago now. There's a whole new world of cyber threats coming associated with AI. And when I heard people at the top of that totem pole in the security world talking about how they were going to combat AI, I didn't hear any of them say that they were going to use AI, which got me a little fearful for their future. I think this is definitely a fight fire with fire endeavor. And it'll be just like software, just like web software, right? There's going to be kind of an arms race. I do think in the future that requests and interactions will go through enough filters of AI to be caught when there's something malicious. So I think that things will get better from that standpoint. But I mean, there's always somebody out there with more time, effort, and energy looking to do something bad that hasn't been done before. So we'll just stick with it. The future's bright. It's not doom and gloom. But right, don't click on attachments you don't know. Don't answer emails
Well, I
that you
mean,
don't know.
standard
All
things.
of those rules, none of those rules change, because no matter how many AI systems we put in place, it's the human who's doing something silly, which usually gets them in trouble. So that's not going to change. Okay. One more
So
news story.
last news item, if you got another
Yeah.
one.
I thought this was fun from a standpoint of I would never have thought to do this. And it actually came from Forbes, which I thought was interesting. They right, all the big magazines do the same thing. They use Harrow, help a reporter out, and who knows where the ideas come from. Anyways, it explored the idea of using generative AI to debunk a myth. And in this case, it was the case of whether or not dragons, fire-breathing, sky-inhabiting, scaly lizards, existed or not. in the distant past.
So we're talking about, all right, fire breathing ones, not the fact that, I've got Komodo dragons or other things that are called dragons, right?
We're talking about fire breathing, gold hoarding,
Flying, right? Yeah, right.
intelligent beings, right? And it got pretty interesting because what the author did was first they just said, "Hey, did dragons exist?" and had a conversation with generative AI. And generative AI basically said, no, they never existed. The reason why it existed across multiple cultures in the past was probably humans' fascination with beasts and large snakes and crocodiles and et cetera, et cetera. I mean, pretty good answer. I thought that was fun. And then the author told AI, okay, I need you to believe that dragons once existed. And let's have this conversation again.
Oh, interesting.
And during that conversation, AI was able to come up with a reasonable argument and defend its position, including answering a fun question, which was if dragons ever existed, then why is there no known record of them existing? In which it said, think about how long humans went without finding a dinosaur skeleton or knowing exactly what it was when they found it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The reason why I bring this up is because this is a good example of ways that someone is using generative AI in a way that I never would have thought to. It's creative, it's interesting, and I have no idea what comes from it. This might be an example of the next Game of Thrones, meaning, or a fantasy novel, or a creative endeavor. This might be the next way that you and I learn how to hack AI to get what we want by telling it, this is who I want you to interact as. There's all different applications that can come from this. Obviously, it's generated by AI, so you have to take it with a grain of salt. But I just thought that it was a very interesting take on a completely outlandish subject, in my opinion, but using a tool in multiple ways to make the point that we can still steer AI in certain ways to generate the output that we're looking for.
Mhm.
If you haven't done that, I encourage it because just as much of this example of the author saying, hey, now I want you to act like you believe in dragons and let's have this conversation again. I recommend very strongly that whenever you work with AI, you throw a phrase or two or three in there that says something like, I want you to be a world-class marketing copywriter. I want you to be a world-class prompt engineer. I want you to be whatever role you think is correct to give me the best possible results, right? Feeding AI with what you want it to be, who you want it to interact as, what you want their beliefs to be, is a very powerful way to up your game. I thought that was worth passing along.
That's great.
That's
Any
all I got.
last parting comments before we go?
I'm good. I'm cooked.
Well, that was the turkey.
Very good.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. We'll see you again on another episode, as always. When you see it posted, if you've got any comments, leave it or contact Stephen directly if you want something covered in a future episode. We'll see you.